Hi friends, I'm excited to share a new layout with you today for the Vicki Boutin design team. I am using the Flower Emporium collection, and I started with pulling a bunch of stamps from past Vicki Boutin collections, and I went through and pulled out a lot of florals and leaves and phrases and words, and I'm going to kind of build some clusters. I'm doing the bottom left corner of the background, and then I'm going to do the top right corner of the background. And so I do kind of start by having the different sides kind of mimic each other, but then as I keep going, it changes a little bit. So each corner will be different. This was a fun way to pull out a bunch of those stamps that I love and haven't used in a while, and kind of mixed and matched a bunch of different images that all kind of speak to the same thing. So I am using, the most important thing here for the type of layout that I'm doing is I am using StazOn black archival ink. So this ink, once you put it down, it is permanent and it will not lift. Once I add watercolor over it and different mediums, it's going to stay stuck to the background. So that is very important because I don't want the ink to bleed. If you were to use a water soluble ink like Distress Oxide or Distress ink, or there's lots of actually other water soluble inks as well, when you start adding layers, it would bleed and kind of turn into a black muddy mess. So here I am making sure that it's going to stay solid where it is. And then I was kind of testing out my photos to see, or my photo that I'm going to be using in the center, to see where I need a few more little images. And right now it looks kind of crazy and super overwhelming, but trust me, I'm going to be covering a lot of it up, and it really is just going to act as kind of a layer in the background, and some of those images will be seen in part, and then the phrases, many of them you'll only see like part of the phrase or one of the words here and there, so no worries there. Here, what I am doing over top of the ink is I'm using clear gesso, and this clear gesso is from Shimmer's Paints. And really, I don't need to do that before I go and add color to that background, but what I was wanting was to, and I didn't need to protect the ink either because it's permanent, so the purpose is not to give a moisture barrier here. I actually wanted streaky, like I wanted to have some streaky lines. So I used that kind of green tool that's in the bottom left corner. That's a Vicki Boutin tool, I think from American Crafts, and I used that to pull the gesso across the page because I wanted sort of some streaky lines in the background. So it will make sense as you see me continue with the layout, but here I'm kind of doing the same thing with color. So this time I am adding, the pink I added was Cosmic Watercolors, and then the orange is a Shimmer's Paints Carrot Top. And what I'm doing is, this is another brush. It's actually a silicone brush, so it's kind of a rubbery tip on the end of it. And I'm just using it because it's easy to hold, and I like the size of it. So I wanted the paint on this layout to sort of look like, the best way I can describe it is like streaky stripes. So I wanted there to kind of be some lines going across the page, and I did not want a smooth finish. I didn't want to use like a packaging technique and have varied layers. I really just wanted it to sort of be like stripes of color. So that is what I am trying to create here. And then I did, for the yellow, I used the gold from the Cosmic Watercolors, and then I also added in some Shimmer's Bumblebee because I wanted it to be a little bit more yellow than gold, and so I needed a paint that was a little bit more yellow. And then the green and blue are both going to be from the Cosmic Watercolors. And so you can kind of see the corner where I have the stamping is really the corner that I want fully covered. And then I was pulling the color away from that. So for the top right corner, I started in the top right corner and pulled towards the left. And then on the bottom left, where I have all that stamping, I put the ink down or the paint down in the bottom left and pulled towards the right. So really, I kind of wanted it to be kind of a juxtaposition against each other, I guess. I don't know. But in the middle, you can kind of see it comes together. So that was this is what I was envisioning. That was my whole goal, was that it would kind of meet in the middle. And that middle part where it's going to meet is sort of behind my photo. And that's really where I wanted everything to come together, because I was really trying to draw your eye and all of the attention into the center of the layout. And that is what I was thinking. So after I pulled the color with my silicone brush, then I'm going now with a paintbrush, and I am adding stripes of color. So I'm kind of just going across and adding lines to make it look a little bit more streaky. And then also to sort of vary the color. So like I added in a little bit of purple here in the pink section and also in the blue section. And then I added a little pink into the orange into the yellow into the green, and green into the yellow. So I was kind of trying to kind of vary those colors as the color went down the page. And then I am going to let that dry. And while I am letting it dry, I am creating some strips of paper. So all of these patterned papers are from the Flower Emporium collection. And I went and pulled just some vivid patterned papers that act more solid. So there's a lot of patterned papers in the Flower Emporium collection that have like big patterns and very noticeable patterns that are beautiful, that draw your eye to them. And I wanted sort of more subtle patterns for this, because I wanted the papers to look a little bit more solid. So I went through and I'm trying to sort of match the colors that I used on the background with the papers. And really it's actually I kind of did the opposite, because I pulled the papers that I wanted to use first. I had decided what papers I was going to be using. I had them sitting off to the side, and then I chose the paint colors based on those papers. So either way, I'm wanting the paper and the paint to match. And so that was my focus when I was choosing what I would use on the background. And I will have 2 different yellow patterned papers. I'll end up with 2 different pink patterned papers. There, I added that pink one. And so some of the pattern papers are from the 12 by 12 paper pad, and then some of the pattern papers are from the other sets in the Flower Emporium collection. So there's 3 different sets of 12 by 12 patterned papers that you can get, 3 different kind of collections of papers, and so I'm pulling from a couple of those. The patterned papers that are a little bit more vivid and bold, like that second pink stripe of paper, and then the orange, those are from the 12 by 12 Staples paper pack. So that is kind of a more vivid, saturated color of the colors found in the collection. That's also where the green and the blue come from. So that is those pattern papers, and then the rest of the pattern papers came from the 12 by 12 paper patterns pad of 12 by 12 papers. So just if you are wondering where I got all those from, I pulled from those 2 sets. And then I went ahead, I tore the edges of those, distressed the edges of those with my edge distressor, so they're rough. I wanted a very rough edge, a very textural background. And so I got that. I did use my T-square ruler when I was gluing them down, just to kind of make sure they were mostly straight. Of course, I didn't tear straight strips of paper, so they're a little, off of straight. But in general, the center of each of those stripes of paper is straight across the page. And then here, I am poking 5 holes in each strip of paper. So I did at the ends, and then I did at 6 inches straight in the middle of the layout, and then I split the difference between those. So I did the ends first, and then the center, and then I did kind of in the middle of each of those holes. And then I did just the long stitches through those and matched the thread. I used embroidery thread, all 6 strands of the embroidery thread, and added that hand stitching. And I love how that adds just another little layer of color and texture, and it also helps make sure that those papers stay good and glued down, because the gesso does have a grit to it, and so it does make it a little bit more difficult to glue to. And then what I did is I went through the chipboard, one of the chipboard sets, and pulled out all of the beautiful frames. And it was kind of funny because when I first looked through the set of chipboard, it kind of seemed more like there were more neutrals, like more neutral black and white frames, or kind of khaki and black frames. And as I was really going through that set and pulling them, I actually found a whole rainbow of frames. Some of them were very small, like the pinks were very small, and one of the green ones was very small. But I was able to find pink, blue, green, orange, maybe not orange. I think I just used pattern paper for orange, but green, blue, and pink for sure. And then I just used those frames kind of as the background for my photo. So you can kind of see that I have those layered behind the photo. I did trim off if there was enough of the frame that was going to be behind the photo that I could use it on another layout. I trimmed it off and saved it. But otherwise it's just kind of layering behind that photo. And I did frame patterned paper in each of those frames. So I used kind of the scraps that I had from tearing the paper and all of that to frame some patterned paper. And that's just adding another layer of color and texture behind my photo and kind of drawing your eye to the center of the layout. And then I also pulled these words from that same chipboard set that has all of those frames. And I love the bold black and white words against the colorful background. I feel like it helps draw attention to that photo. And then also I pulled out 2 of the black and white frames, those circle frames. And I'm a sucker for a circle frame. I love circular chipboard frames. They're my favorite. I usually never have any in my stash because I always use those from every set that I get, because I love circles, and especially chipboard circle frames. So I did pull the black and white frames, and I am using those to kind of anchor where my words are going to go on the top left of the photo and bottom right of the photo. So the title is just going to be Amazing Photo. And then I pulled out the floral patterned paper, and I've used lots of these flowers on lots of layouts. So at this point, I'm using scraps of patterned paper to cut those florals out of. But it really worked out because on most of my other layouts, I've used larger flowers. And on this layout, I really wanted kind of teeny tiny flowers. So I didn't want it to be a super florally layout. I really wanted those layers of color, and I kind of thought they looked like water going through, because the layout is a pool layout. And so I always think of, I don't know, like water traveling in lines. I don't know, something about that. I love for water layouts to be very linear on the background. And so I didn't want the flowers to kind of overpower everything on this one. Usually I want it to be all flowers. So it's kind of a different style for me, but I did have fun going and pulling out the teeny tiny flowers out of the pattern paper. And then they were a little more muted colors. The tinier flowers had softer colors. And so I used some watercolor markers, and then I pulled out Vicki Boutin's art crayons. That's what I'm doing here, is I pulled out her art crayons, and I'm adding some water to those to paint the flowers. I'm going to actually just dip the flowers right into that color. You can see there, I just turned the flower over in the color that I have on my glass mat there, and I am just adding some different layers of color to kind of make those flowers work more cohesively with the patterned paper that I have on the background. And there were originally, in this Flower Emporium collection, there are lots of beautiful, bold colored flowers. It's just I've used a lot of them. So, and I did find that the smaller scale flowers were softer, lighter in the collection. So you should never be afraid to embellish your embellishments, for sure. Here what I'm doing is I'm adding just a little bit of white gesso, because the orange flower, it was a little bright. It was a little too, I don't know, the orange patterned paper that I have there on the background, that strip of orange, is a very rich orange. It's almost like a, not quite burnt orange, but it's a rich, like a very rich color. And so the watercolor markers that I had were a little bit more vivid, kind of like a brighter, not neon, not quite neon, but a little bit brighter than the pattern paper. So I did use some gesso to kind of dull that out. And then I added a few more layers of color here. I'm adding a little bit of distress oxide. I didn't realize when I was actually making the layout, I didn't realize how many layers of things I did on these teeny tiny little flowers that you hardly even see. So it's kind of funny that I spent so much time making sure they were right. But you know, it's one of those things, like I'm very particular for a messy scrapbooker that loves to make a mess and have very messy backgrounds and details. I am very particular about certain things, and color is one of those things. So I need the colors to be right. If the colors aren't exactly right, they stand out like a sore thumb for me, and I can't, that's the only thing I see when I look at the layout. So I have to make sure that I get them right, so that everything works cohesively together. So I got all of those flowers done. I did add some tangled thread in the black and white frames, the circular frames, kind of behind those corners of the photo. And then here I am adding some half pearls and crystals from my stash to the centers of the flowers. And I love doing that with paper flowers because it just adds more detail to the clusters and kind of makes it look, I don't want to say really realistic because it doesn't make it look more realistic, but it gives it more oomph. You know, it gives it a little more pizzazz. So I'm adding some of those jewels, and then I'm also adding pops of color in the coordinating colors around the cluster, and that is the final layout. So this was it was a pretty simple design. It did take me time because there were lots of little details, but I very much enjoyed adding all of those details and kind of dipping into some of the things in this collection, the Flower Emporium collection, that I had not used yet. So those frames were one of those things, and I absolutely loved using those and using a bunch of them on the layout. So I hope you enjoyed the process. If you see any details or have any questions about anything, be sure and pop those down in the comments, and I would love to hear what you think. And I hope you have a beautiful day and that you find some time to create. And if you haven't used this collection yet, I hope you get your hands on it. Bye for now.